extraordinary many-faceted roles of music that we're hearing about during the course of this weekend. It really is as many-faceted as the experience of being human, isn't it? And like human beings, bewildering and contradictory and glorious all at the same time. But it's time for you maybe to ask our two speakers some questions. Yes, lady here.
A question to Alberto. Just wondering whether you could talk a little bit about
I don't hear well, so you have to translate.
Louder?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll start again. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of music in promoting conflict during the dirty war in Argentina.
Yes. Could you talk a little bit about the role of music in promoting war? During which war was this again? The dirty war in Argentina, as it's known.
Oh, yes. Well, to begin with, we had the national anthem on all the time. You're talking about the last one, the Falklands War. Yeah. Is that the war?
The dirty war, she says.
But the dirty wars, you mean in the 18th century? Against
Can
England.
we have some dates, please? This would help.
Against the ones to get the English
70s.
out?
So the dictatorship in Argentina.
But that wasn't a war.
No,
the dictatorship was the control of the country by the military, who took over after we had a terrible president. We had two terrible presidents, Perón, and then he, as a joke, as a last joke, to finish destroying the country, appointed his wife, who was a cabaret dancer in Panama and who had no experience of politics. He appointed her a vice president of the country, and the constitution says that at the death of the president, the vice president automatically becomes president. So we had this woman in the presidency, and of course it was terrible, and it all controlled by Washington, of course, because the whole of Latin America they decide what they want to do with us. And CIA worked very well to organize the military takeover, and then most of the military people in charge were all former students at what I call the School of the Assassins, but the official name at the time was School of the Americas, a military school the United States had in Panama until the year 2000, and where all this military trained, including also all the people who worked in the Pinochet government in Chile.
I think the main question, though, here is about how music was involved in this.
Music was only involved in, like Lily Marlene here, to entertain people and to keep them kind of distracted from what government was doing. It wasn't really a government, it was just a bunch of criminals running the country, all making a lot of money. One of them was later arrested, and Videla, and he died only about a month ago in prison. And there wasn't much music going on specifically, because there was nothing to promote. All they wanted was to control the country and become rich while they were in power. That is all.
Lady here has a question.
Thank you. What changed and when to make women composers more obvious or become into being? Or why were there no women composers and then all of a sudden there are?
Yes, it's the beginning of the 20th century that you start to find women classical composers. And I've always found that you start to get figures like Lily Boulanger, who tragically died at 25 and had already produced works of genius by then. God knows what the story would have been if she'd lived in just another 10 years. That's an interesting thing. God, this is a huge question, but I just remember recently reading a Jane Austen novel again the other day and discovering a remark that music should not be amongst the accompaniments of a gentleman. So there was, curiously enough, in this country for a long time, there was a prejudice against the idea of, in favour of the idea of women, of music being more of a women's thing, which I think still prevails to some extent in this country. And yet, oddly enough, we still find male composers coming through, which is, you can't say that this was a kind of stereotypical ideal that this is what men should be doing, because you look at a lot of these men's autobiographies and you find that their fathers particularly felt it was the last thing they should be doing. Handel's father tried to beat it out of him, actually. But that's another huge issue.
Can I say something about popular music?
Yes,
I think you'll
music,
find
yes.
that actually some of the most popular songs of the Second World War were written by women. I'm trying to think, for my mother, who was on the screen just now, her big song that makes her cry from the Second World War is Bésame Mucho. And that I can't remember the name of the composer, but is a woman composer, a Mexican woman composer. And the other very important person in France who wrote a lot of songs, she was actually probably the most popular song composer in France during the Second World War, is Marguerite Monod, who wrote the songs for Piaf. And there are several songs by Monod that actually very directly, for a while she was very pro-Pétain, and her songs were, you could say, collaborationist songs.
It is fascinating, isn't it, that whatever even composers set out to achieve in terms of political allegiance in their work, or their songs or whatever, it can take on a life of its own, and people will adopt it absolutely to even quite contradictory, it would seem, points of view, isn't it? And Lily Marlene is a fabulous example of that.
It's most, but there are many other examples. It's so interesting how songs and pieces of music change their meaning because of political developments.
There are many cases in 20th century history, wars. Some of them I named before, in Vietnam, in Korea, and also Second World War, where women were brought specially when they noticed that soldiers were more affected by songs sung by attractive women than by men. And Doris Day is one of the famous ones. Of course, Marlene Dietrich, who made the Lily Marlene also so famous.
I think it's quite so.
Nigel has a question. Yes, by all means, yes.
No, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay. Well, you might as well now say. Yeah, thank you.
So just a question, an observation question. First of all, I want to thank you very much for mentioning Lady Forsdyke. She was my mentor. I was her assistant at Horton Hospital, an unsung heroine of music therapy. But to go on to another woman, musician and creative artist who was my mentor to distance. In the origins of art therapy, in the use of it for helping children victims of conflict, my hero was Phil Dicker-Brandeis in Theresienstadt.
Oh, yes.
And the point I'm suggesting, what I'd like to hear your thoughts about, is that I'm trying very hard to get the roots of Friedel's method. I've been working closely with the few remaining people that knew her. One thing we discovered is it was intensely musical. Like we work with art therapy now as music therapists. Friedel was using from the voice, actually activated the body and relaxed and then motivated the body and the children actually through the voice and music. So I wondered if you had any thoughts, as an artist, about that relationship in your life. You pointed the effectiveness of art therapy, but have you seen it in relation to music therapy? Do you see it as a relationship? That's Robert.
Can you have
Oh,
tell me a bit, because I don't.
Yes. We're talking about Nigel's experience is very much to do with music therapy and the effect of art, particularly in music, in helping people. How would you say? Huge subject. So many words you could use. What's your feeling about music's use in this kind of function as helping people heal to the particularly to terms with the effects.
Definitely, music can be therapeutic, but that is very different from what I aim, which is music for peace. You have Daniel Barenboim with his fantastic work with the two orchestras mixing Muslims and Jews playing together, but that will never stop the fighting with Tony Blair organizing wars in the Middle East as a war envoy, but politically called peace envoy to the Middle East. And
yes, that is one of the strangest job descriptions.
That is, and becoming richer and richer by the day. With the more people die, the richer he becomes. No matter how much music we play, that will never affect war. And you can have in Iraq a quartet made by two Iraqi performers and two American soldiers that they can play together, but that it will never bring peace. And religion is also, unfortunately, very important here, because you have these people in the orchestra of Daniel Barenboim playing together wonderful music, but when the Muslim young man falls in love with the Jewish musician and vice versa, and they want to get married, the parents say, no, you can play Beethoven symphonies together, but you cannot love each other because religion doesn't allow it. So that is the end of peace.
Could I ask Patrick if you would regard music as the most effective morale booster and propaganda tool of the war, however it was used, as opposed to words or speeches or any other form of culture, as opposed to theatre or anything else?
I would just like to quote Woody Allen and say, every time I hear Wagner, I want to invade Poland. That music affects you in a kind of very visceral way. I mean, it bypasses the intellect. And so for me, yes, I would say absolutely that is the case.
It is also worth remembering, though, that by 1937 there was a tacit agreement between Bayreuth and Hitler and the authorities that they would not perform Parsifal because its message of compassion and forgiveness was deemed too subversive.
I think it's because they misunderstood Parsifal. I don't think that's its real message at all.
Well, we can argue about that one, but I think it just goes to show how much more complicated these pieces of music are than the propagandists would like to make them. Music has a habit of doing things which we maybe don't intend. I'd just like to end up by saying something I remember very strongly about music in this context. Reading Kafka's Metamorphosis again recently, and there was a sentence that leapt out at me I'd never noticed before. Towards the end, Gregor, having gone through this horrible transformation, hears a violin playing, and there is a sentence that almost reduced me to tears when I read it. How could he be an insect if music could do this to him? And in my own experience of serious clinical depression, I've had that experience with music too. And maybe in war, for whatever purpose, to whatever political ends, people need that message, whether they're aggressors or victims or whatever. But we need to be reminded that we are more than just animals tearing each other, ignorant armies clashing by night, as Arnold Bennett put it. That's just my thought. We really have to wind up now, I'm afraid. But we can continue this very fruitfully, I'm sure, later during the day. Thank you very much.